So now we'll make it fail in a predictable way.
We deliberately designed some parts of the firing system to fail irreversibly, such as a high voltage capacitor.
And so what you'd like to do is have something become inoperable. And so that was the concept of a weak link. And so you started co-locating, the strong links with the weak links, so that as the environmental insult started to heat the weapon, you would have the weak link become inoperable before the strong link became ineffective. And so out of that work came the basic principles that have really stood up for years: isolation, inoperability, and incompatibility. Some people have suggested a fourth principle of independence.
That makes you safe. So that was the great breakthrough, I think, that Stan Spray and his staff came up with.
Enhanced nuclear detonation safety with strong links and weak links and meet the criteria of extreme safety. That was a clean, simple, and most efficient way in which anything that failed for whatever reason would neuter the system.
Thinking back, that's kind of an obvious thing, maybe. But we didn't have it until these folks invented it. A requirement to change the design specifications so that you have more safety.
I think it was just a gradual, natural evolution, because we were always concerned about safety of the devices, especially as the numbers of them kept increasing and the deployment was pretty much worldwide.
In the northwest corner of South Vietnam rests the small valley of Khe Sanh. The siege is on. The North Vietnamese launch a massive artillery attack. U.S. commanders predict a major North Vietnamese offensive just before the Lunar New Year on January 30th.
In late January 1968, the Johnson White House was consumed with the war in Vietnam. Coming just days before the North Vietnamese Tet Offensive, the Thule nuclear accident was almost a distraction. McNamara called for an immediate halt to SAC's airborne alert program.
Chrome Dome is canceled because of the embarrassment and the costs involved with having a second nuclear accident. And yet, the interplay between the warning system and the offensive capability that Chrome Dome led us to have wasn't contemplated at the time. Indeed, when the B-52 crashed outside of Thule, senior officials in the Pentagon really didn't know that the reason why it was so close to Thule was because it was on this special Thule monitor mission. The B-52s on the airborne alert also had a second mission, which was to look down at American air defense radars to make sure that they were working properly.
One of the concerns was that the Russians could take out one of the radars as a means of hiding the follow-on attack prior to a major launch on the United States. But what happens if the airplane that crashed, the nuclear weapons on board went off and destroyed the radar?
There was a potential for an accident to occur that could have cascaded into a false warning. This kind of unusual interplay between an offensive nuclear system being kept up in the air, a defensive warning system, and the command and control never had been thought through. It was too unlikely an event.
A low probability event that you'd have both the airplane crashing and the nuclear weapons going off within range of the radar to destroy it. But it wasn't infinitesimally small.
Fortunately, the one-point safety system that had been placed on those bombs worked, but exceedingly rare events occur all the time.
Generation exercises were a mainstay of SAC long after Thule happened, because they were no longer flying Chrome Dome, but they still wanted to maintain operational readiness.
We used to load the bombers up with a full load of bombs and pull them on the end of the runway and go to take off fire, roll down the runway. And then chop the fire and go off the runway on the high-speed taxiway and taxi back to the alert area. Because we wanted a realism, we wanted assurance right up to pull back the yoke and take off that the crews could do everything.
These were oftentimes referred to as elephant walks. So they continued to do all of the things of handling the bombs, bringing them from the storage area, installing them on the clip-ins, putting them up on the bombers, and everything short of flying them.
These could be fully loaded airplanes, fully loaded with fuel. And so it was quite taxing on the brakes to do this. And a number of situations occurred where the aircraft actually caught on fire because of hot brakes. SAC was continually putting themselves and the weapons at risk conducting these ground alert operations.
It was generally well accepted by both the civilians and the military, the civilians and the AC and the military, that we had to have a posture that was survivable. In the interest of survivability, we have accepted some risks. Two departments have worked together very well in trying to mitigate those risks.
Positive measures mitigating the safety risks of nuclear weapons were formally established in 1960. And from the beginning, nuclear detonation safety was conceived of as a shared responsibility.
It's the principal responsibility of the Department of Defense to assure that the abnormal environments don't occur very often. In fact, at a diminishingly low level. But it is the laboratory's responsibility to assure that given an accident, that will not be allowed to progress to a nuclear detonation.
In late 1970, 2 years after the Sandia Safety Study Group began its work, the weak link, strong link concepts were formally briefed to the DoD. But acceptance of this new standard for safety design came slowly.
Some of the discoveries were actually disbelieved by a number of designers.
They wanted to believe their nice, orderly world, the one they were trained in and raised in. This is the way electrical circuits behave. So we arranged to make a display called the burned board briefing.
And people were seeing actual examples of what could happen. They were not just seeing view graphs and words about what might happen. They were seeing hardware about this, this could happen.
The idea of a burned board briefing originated with Bob Purifoy. After leading Sandia's successful design effort for the Navy, Purifoy became Director of Weapon Development and undertook a complete review of the stockpile.
I quickly became concerned about electrical system designs that would tolerate severe accidents. Those bombs that used high voltage, thermally activated batteries.
So all of those weapons could possibly be armed in the case of a fire that set off the high voltage thermal battery.
The electrical systems of greatest concern were those of air-delivered weapons on alert, those loaded up during SAC's generation exercises. In spring 1974, Sandia Vice President Glenn Fowler briefed the lab's concerns to the Division of Military Application at AEC headquarters.
There was some reluctance on their part to greet that with any enthusiasm. The DoD felt, I think, that what they needed was more warfighting capability. They had enough safety.
Fowler and Purifoy decided to go on record with their concerns.
Glenn's memo expressed that these weapons should be upgraded with modern safety features or retired.
Right away, people were indignant that the labs would blow the whistle on themselves.
Words coming from the designers themselves can't easily be dismissed
as possibly false.
And that caused no end of hysteria in Washington.
The burned board briefing was arranged as a demonstration for key Washington decision makers. Among the first to receive the briefing was the Assistant to the Secretary of Defense for Atomic Energy, Don Cotter. A former Sandian, Cotter found the briefing a sobering experience. In May 1975, he issued a directive for a joint safety evaluation of the entire stockpile.
Give the DoD credit. Once they decided to go do the stockpile review, they went at it with, enthusiasm, and I think with a real hard look, not only this time at the weapon, but at the weapon system.
Beginning in the summer of 1975, joint technical working groups were formed to evaluate each category of weapon and weapon system against modern safety standards.
This was a joint review process. We had people from the laboratories and from the Department of Defense working together as a team to review the system.
Strategic air-delivered weapon systems on alert were given first priority. The conclusion of the safety studies in spring 1977 coincided with more than a decade of advanced development work, yielding the first air-delivered weapon to fully incorporate enhanced electrical safety, the B61 Mod 5.
The B61 got its start in the early to middle 60s. Everybody on the team would get a pep talk that we were working on the Cadillac of all bombs. The design architecture of the system was such that it allowed for a continuing set of improvements for achieving improved safety, particularly as well as improved use control.
This inherent safety and security would in time make its way through the rest of the modern stockpile. The B61 established a modular architecture for nuclear weapons.
The firing set and the original 61s eventually were replaced with firing sets in roughly the same volume that had modern nuclear safety features and capabilities, all integrated into the firing set.
And that's why packaging becomes so important when you're first laying out the design of a nuclear weapon. You can clearly put in strong links and weak links and have them totally ineffective if they're quite some distance apart. And that's the reason we co-locate and put them basically within the firing system itself.
The modernization of the weapon systems didn't happen overnight. There were units that were out there that had no modern safety associated with them. It became more and more apparent that we need to review our entire stockpile.
Improvements to older air-delivered systems began in 1979, a time when East-West relations were descending to new lows. During the 1980s, strategic and conventional arsenals expanded on both sides. A global anti-nuclear protest movement emerged. Nuclear arms control efforts were re-established, and a nuclear accident galvanized world opinion.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
By the end of the decade, sweeping political changes had overtaken well-laid plans for weapon system modernization. An era had ended when older systems were routinely replaced with new and safer designs. Ensuring the always and the never of nuclear weapons would at once become more public and more challenging.